Hey, welcome to the video, how to save for and spend in retirement. I was thinking I could do sort of the answer first and then put together some subsequent videos on the math behind it. So here we go. Savings, earlier the better. If you're working and you can save 5%, 10% of your money, put it in an IRA, it's definitely better than if you don't. So that's that. Any windfall, if your parents die or somebody leaves you money, it should be invested, not spent. That's the beauty of compounded interest. You can still do okay if you just do 5%, 10%, but you're going to do really well if you get an inheritance, 25,000, whatever. And we can talk about managing the taxes of a non-IRA investment in a future video, but just for a highlight, earlier the better from your weekly or monthly check. And then if you get a windfall, you should invest that too. So the types of investments that you should do, you should invest in uncorrelated assets. So the reason for uncorrelated assets is so that you can get more returns and less variation. And one of the ways we're going to talk about variation is standard deviation. We'll get into that in the math videos, but there's only a handful of investments that you can do. You can do stocks, which everybody knows about. You can do bonds. For IRAs, it's recommended that you don't do municipal bonds, but there's short-term, medium-term, long-term. There's real estate, which is maybe your home. And then there's real estate investment trusts. Believe it or not, this has done well lately, but over 100 years, it's only 4%. This is about 10% over 100 years. This is about 6% this year. Real estate is about 4%. Commodities we'll talk about later, international, but these are by and large somewhat uncorrelated, and that's what makes them good. Now, you'd say, well, why don't I put all my money in stocks? But this one has variation is high, and then this one variation is lower. This one has variation high. So it makes it tricky, but we're going to talk about all of this. And this came from the 1990 Nobel Prize by Markowitz. His paper was on the efficient market theory, and he showed that if you diversify your savings, that you're going to get a higher return, less variation. And then Vanguard, Bogle, Fidelity, they all started their companies, and they pretty much just follow his advice. So you can do this on your own. You want to save in IRAs tax-free. We'll talk about Roth, 401k, and all of that in a future video. You need to know what not to do. You don't want to do Bitcoin. I don't even understand Bitcoin. Plus, you got plenty of things to invest in. Why would you want to add more? Gold. The return is surprisingly low over time with a monstrous standard deviation. Day trading, you can't, it's not like a casino where you can pick the winner. You want to stay long and steady. You don't want to go short and margin and option. You don't want to do it a lot. It's it's not like the American work ethic. What happened here? Work less on your, sorry about that. Work less on your investment for bigger gains. The American work ethic is work harder and you'll get ahead. With investing, it's exactly the opposite. Do all your thought process up front. Then there's some subtle readjusting as you get older to drive to less and less variation. And in a minute, we're going to talk about how do you spend it. Then you keep adjusting it down over time. But time is your friend. Because of compounded interest, and we'll show the math later, if you can invest early, leave it alone, have good returns, have the less amount of, or the least amount of variation that you can handle, you'll be fine. Of course, you don't want to borrow too much. There's no reason people have to keep up with the Joneses. Just because they get a fancy car doesn't mean you have to get a fancy car. Just because your family member bought a beautiful house, you don't need to buy a beautiful house. You can buy a good house. Think about the house you grew up in. It's probably smaller than the house that you're in now or you want to buy. Why? Anyway, this is Susie Orman does a good job on this with the psychology of how you invest and how you save. Should be worth checking out. And then finally, for how to save for retirement, you want to invest in firms with low expense ratios like Vanguard. There's other ones, but why give your money to a financial advisor? And why give your money to a brokerage house? Some brokerage houses say we do better when the people that we help do better. Yeah, bull. Even if you do bad, they're still going to take their cut. They're not going to work for free. So do it yourself. So how do you withdraw retirement? Here's how you withdraw. So there's been a lot of papers on this, and people argue all the time about should it be 4%, should it be plus or minus, should it be 3.5? Just bear with me for a second. But know that the 4% is designed to be adjusted for a cost of living inflation factor. Not this year for sure, not in the late 80s, but the average inflation over 100 years is 3% plus or minus. And we're going to talk about how we can run a sort of quasi Monte Carlo in Excel to show you, make sure you don't run out of money by varying inflation over the last 100 years, varying your investments using data over the last 100 years. Now, the disclaimer is, and I have to do this too, is I can't predict the future, you can't predict the future, but unless we get hit by an asteroid, I think it's a reasonable assumption that the next 100 years likely will be about the same as the last 100 years. Plus, we're all going to die. So I haven't seen any financial advice that combines actuarial tables with financial tables to show you the certainty to what level of probability you want, 99%, 99.5%, that you won't run out of money. So that's what we're going to do. So know that the 4% is designed with cost of living, which is averaged about 3% over the last 100 years. So simply 4 plus 3 is 7. So you need an annual return of 7%. You can't do 7%. Can't do 7% with CDs or money market. So you need some of these investments here, but we're going to need to manage the variation. That's the tricky part. That's what we're going to do, the Excel demos and the other stuff in the upcoming meetings. So for the balance of this, oops. So we can't predict the future, as I mentioned before, but we can look back on what would have happened if we had used this strategy at any year in the past 100 years, but we randomly selected a different inflation from another year, a different stock return from another year, a different bond, and we acted like they were uncorrelated assets. Now, there is some correlation between the asset classes, but that's for more advanced analysis. And at the end of the day, it doesn't change the answers very much. So we're going to go back, like I said, for 100 years. We're going to include World War II, the Great Depression, the 2008 financial crisis, and we're going to see how do we save and how do we spend in retirement. So with that, thank you. And if you like the video, please press the subscribe button. And I'm looking forward to reading your comments. Thank you.